Thanks a million, Derek. I must have done something right the last time because you've had me back, so thank you very much. I also would like to say that myself and Helen did not liaise with one another about what we were going to wear today, but I like your style, sister. Thank you. So I've been really challenged by the topic of my presentation today, and I have changed this presentation so many times. So we've probably ended up with a really cobbled together bits and pieces, but I'd just like to share with you my current thoughts on where we are with data, and of course everybody's worst nightmare when they're organising conferences. I'm not sticking to the brief. I'm really sorry, but I really, struggled to think about where are we going with all this stuff. Oh, I'm going to push this back down because otherwise you can't see my face. And I don't know how to move this forward. Story of my life. Is there a thing? What am I supposed to? Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, hey. Right, okay, we'll go back then. Okay. So I'm very conflicted about all this stuff to do with measurement. And I think I'm conflicted because everybody sitting here in the audience today, we have different hats on at different times in our lives. We have got very different perspectives depending on what day it is, what role we're performing. So, and yet when we talk about sharing healthcare information, it's as if we stay in one role all the time. And of course we don't. We all have different roles, we all have different perspectives. And I think it's really important that we think about that when we're talking about healthcare data. So I'm sure everybody in this room would agree that the time for this idea about we're going to tell you what we think because we're all powerful and all-knowing Wizard of Oz's, those days are gone. But at the same time, I do think that we run the risk of everything being completely consumed in our interactions with healthcare professionals about data gathering. So if I think about the majority of people who are accessing healthcare services, they tend to be frail older people with multiple morbidity. And yet if you look at the absolute massive quantities of questionnaires, etc., that everybody is demanding that we fill in, I just do not see that as being a value add. So I think that the role of IPPOSI and everybody sitting here today is to try and make some sensible decisions about what is important information that we need to gather that will actually be of use in terms of our decision making together. I think that's very important. So, and I wish I could wander around, I can't really. Can I take this off? Is that okay? So, it's really important, I think, when we talk about consultation or engagement, because the vast majority of what happens at the moment is just tokenism. When I look at it, I think it is tokenism. And you can end up having arguments with people over which is the best model for engagement. But suffice it to say that I think that there's far too much that happens as tokenism instead of us actually sitting down together with a blank sheet and figuring out what it is that we want to achieve by all this wonderful stuff that we can do nowadays in healthcare. Because an awful lot of what we do, time and time again, we know that as healthcare professionals, what we think is important to patients is wrong. So we know that, we've been getting information back on that study after study after study. So why are we still getting it so wrong? And that's where I think that we really need organisations like IPPOSI to help us figure it out. But we need to figure it out together. It can't be, there's too much of a kind of a them and us, I think. Whereas at the end of the day, there is only us. We are citizens of this country, and surely together we need to be figuring out what is important to us as all shared citizens of this country and the resources that we all contribute. And I think that's very important. And I think that we're at a real tipping point, I think, from a global perspective. I really do find myself thinking that the world has gone completely barking mad. And I think that we really need to try and figure out what is important to us in a world that seems to have gone completely mad. So it was funny that somebody mentioned earlier about Professor Doctor, I think it was Rikshi, I think you mentioned it. So I am Professor Doctor, and in a couple of years I'll be Professor Doctor. And so some will then turn around and go, oh, Aine, you're very hierarchical. And yet if you look on social media, there are women saying I should be saying that. So I'm really conflicted. I don't know what to call myself, so I'll just call myself Anya because that's my name. But you know what I mean? I think it's just getting very challenging for us all to figure out what is important and what is important to us as individuals within our own context and not be shouted at. I think that there's so much shoutiness going on at the moment and opinions that seem to me to be based on very little fact. But then it's so difficult sometimes to figure out what is important, what isn't important. If you look at any type of news media, there's conflicting reports about what's good for you, what's bad for you, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. It's extremely confusing. So how can we go about sharing the important information so that we're not completely overwhelmed by language that is completely excludes us as individuals and as citizens? And I think the best way to do that is to do it together. So data, when it comes to data, I am very scared. I am really I find myself overwhelmed by being terrified by the idea of big data. And I don't know, did any of you see there was a run of The Secrets of Silicon Valley last week on RTE2? I'd really encourage you to have a look at it because you'll be absolutely terrified by the end of it. Because and it was bizarre because I was thinking about this talk and I thought he's just saying everything that I'm worried about. So I think big data is a bit like the One Ring, and those of you that know me know that I make reference to Tolkien quite a bit, because each one of us, depending on what hat we're wearing at any given time, thinks that once we have the data, it will be good. We will use the data for good. It can only be for good. But actually, we half the time don't know what is going to happen with that data afterwards. And very often I feel a bit like Galadriel. So Galadriel passes the test but she knows that if she was to take the One Ring, that in her desire to do good with that ring, she would end up being corrupted by the ring and that she would end up doing bad. And I think that is a problem with data generally. I think we need to be really careful about what it is that we're doing. So we're collecting all this wonderful information for good, but actually what else is happening to it? And there's just example after example of when it goes so badly wrong. So there's no doubt that we're living in an area, in a time in society when there's just the potential for data collection and the use of data is absolutely overwhelming. It's absolutely fantastic. It's extraordinary how we can communicate with each other. And there's bits that I love. I mean, I love Twitter, even though people can be sometimes very mean. And I don't particularly like people being mean, but most of the time people are absolutely fantastic. I think that's in every walk of life. But there is a downside to that. And there are data breaches happening all the time. And it's in all the time. And I find that really scary. So you hear about it from time to time. We know about the Facebook, we know about Cambridge Analytica. Because we're sharing this information all the time. So even though technology is enabling us to share information that's apparently going to improve our experience, what else is happening with that information? And I think that is really important for us to consider as citizens. And there was, in my primary school, a long time ago, in a wee place called Kilkee in South Down, there was a teacher that once said to us when we were children that a reputation is like a feather pillow. If you cut up that pillow and release all those feathers, trying to get your reputation back is a bit like trying to run around Kilkee Main Street trying to pick up all those feathers. And I think that big data is a bit like that. Once it's out there, folks, we can't get it back. You cannot pull that information back. And yet we are sharing our really personal information and personal details about our lives, I believe, without really fully understanding what that means and the consequences of that. Because once it's out there, we cannot get it back. And I find that really scary. So there's a whole movement about how to teach children about good digital citizenship. But actually, I think that these are skills that we all need. Certainly, I could be doing with it. I think that we all need to start to become aware of what we mean by digital citizenship, and really start to be very careful about what information we're allowing to be used. Because if you're anything like me, you have been bombarded now with GDPR about can we use your data, can we use your data. And does anybody read through that stuff? I certainly don't. And just this pop-up appears and you just click OK. And we click OK without fully appreciating exactly what it is that these guys are going to be doing with our data. Because believe you me, it's not all altruistic. That information is being shared for all sorts of different reasons. And I, for one, am not comfortable with that. I do not like the fact that Tesco are using my shopping data and it's scary, the pop-ups, the things that pop up. The analysis that can go on that reveals an awful lot about you as an individual, I think is absolutely terrifying. As I said, look at that, the secrets of Silicon Valley, and it'll scare the bejesus out of you, because it certainly scared me. And perspective is really, really important. And I think that we all tend to think about, especially from a healthcare data collection point of view, that we're just looking at one tiny little aspect and tiny little perspective. Whereas actually, the whole thing is an elephant, and I quite like that because it's also the elephant in the room, if you like. So, and we all look at things very differently. So I was at a conference recently, and I loved this. This was a guy called, I think is it Chris or Carroll Savage, presented this from the Carroll Institute. So there's the triple aim. We talk about the triple aim. We've alluded to the quadruple aim today, which is a simultaneous pursuit of those three areas. But look at the difference in perspective that we all have. I thought this was fascinating. So even though we're starting to talk the same language, our perspective on those different areas is slightly different. And I think that this is the sort of thing that we really need to research a bit more, so that we understand the differences in those perceptions. Because very often we think we're talking about the same thing, and I don't believe that we are. And research like this shows us that we've got slightly different views on things. And I think at the end of the day, we have to do it together, because there's all manner of things that are being done to make the world a better place. But that is other people's perceptions of a better world, and not necessarily us as citizens. So I believe as citizens that we need to be building that together. And I wanted to give you an idea. At that conference, there was a whole discussion around person-centred care. And I don't know if you can see that. But one session, 2, 3 about person-centred care. And in those presentations, there was only one that was actually about person-centred care. So this was very hospital-orientated. But when we talk about person-centred care, it was clear to me that we mean very different things. And what we've tried to do, and working very closely with IPPOSI, is to try and get a common language around what we mean by person-centred care. And that's what I'm hoping to share with you today. So, there is an awful lot, I think, of very confusing language around this, and there's different levels and application of person-centred care. And I've been studying this for a long time, but blimey, it is confusing. If you have to start talking about different levels and horizontal, vertical, parallel, I think we're losing the plot a bit. So it shouldn't be that complicated to talk about person-centred coordinated care. It shouldn't be, because we kind of know what we mean by that, and yet when it comes to nailing it, we're having great difficulty in explaining what that means. So when we were developing the integrated care programs, we wanted to keep the vision really simple. So we wanted integrated care to be all about person-centred, coordinated, co-designed care. And I know that different academic circles would go, oh, Aine, but what do you mean by that? Well, that is when we felt that we really needed, instead of myself and my colleagues going off and coming up with picking a different definition from around the world, that's when we felt that this is ridiculous. What we really need to do is to actually ask people, what do our citizens mean by person-centred coordinated care? And that's what we did, because ultimately, successful integrated care is about the patient experience. And I think Helen mentioned that so extremely well. Because if it doesn't improve the patient experience, then what's it all for? Is it, because we can use the best, new technology? I don't know. But if it doesn't improve the patient experience, then what's the point? So then we did the phase 1, and hopefully you'll all be familiar with phase 1 and phase 2. But phase 1 was all about what do Irish patients want from person-centred coordinated care. And this is still, I do believe that everything that we do in healthcare should hang off this statement. If anything that we do does not speak to that statement, it shouldn't happen. So this is what Irish people, the definition. Person-centred coordinated care provides me with access to and continuity in the services I need when and where I need them. It is underpinned by a comprehensive assessment of my life and my world, together with the information and support I need. It demonstrates respect for my preferences, building care around me and those involved in my care. Now that is a really powerful statement. So when you read through it, that really places a whole pile of responsibility on healthcare designers and deliverers. There's an awful lot in that statement, and I think that we should be immensely, or you should be immensely proud of coming up with such a succinct definition of what it is that you want. And everything that we do in healthcare should be speaking to that statement. And very often, unfortunately, it doesn't. So the patient narrative project, I think it's really important that there's no one way to do it right. I think that, and that's what I love about the wheel. In order to get the voice of the patient truly at the centre of everything that we do, that's going to involve a lot of different things. And the patient narrative project is just one part of that. I'm not saying for 1 second that it is the be-all and the end-all, because I don't think that it is, but it's part of making sure that the patient voice is at the centre. And there's lots of other things that are happening that will also make sure that that happens. But I'm just going to speak to the patient narrative project today. And I think it's really important because we talk about the patient voice and person-centred coordinated care all the time. We talk about integrated care all the time. But yet, how do we deliver that? And it popped into my head again today. So we talk about frameworks, and we talk about steps, and we talk about 10-step frameworks, etc., etc. And I always think of that slide, and then something magical happens. Bing! Except that it doesn't. So we talk about these things, but it's the doing of it that is incredibly difficult. So how do you translate those wonderful frameworks and those wonderful pieces of guidance and models of care? How does that actually get translated into an improved patient experience? And that is what we're still struggling with. So it fits in with HSE corporate plan, quality goals, and all the different ways of really capturing the patient voice. And that is what we've tried to do in the patient narrative project. And that has been, as I say, really led very strongly by IPPOSI. So the idea behind it was that we would design, then there would be a listening series of engagements, if you like, because there's no point in designing it and starting to collect information if you're not going to do anything with it. Analysis and then influencing. And there's an awful lot behind each of those steps, but it gives you a nice cycle of improvement, if you like. And behind it is a huge amount of work done by colleagues in IPPOSI, but also by my fabulous colleague, Claire Hudson. And I'll share with you a little bit about each one of those steps. So that is the process overview that we did the survey development. The survey went live. There was an interpretation workshop and a pilot report and next steps that I'm going to fly through with you. But actually, and as I'm studying more, if you like, from an academic point of view, patient engagement and integrated care, this is actually, there's a huge amount of social science behind this. And a lot, we've learned so much about co-production, and I think we'll continue to learn a lot from one another about how to do this stuff and hopefully do this stuff well. So hopefully, again, you'll know this, and if Claire was here, she'd just probably be kicking me in the leg, because once I start to talk about triangles, I know I start to lose people. But hopefully you know that it is a mechanism for allowing freedom to choose where you want to put your response to the series of questions that's being put to you. And you can gain a whole lot of quantitative and qualitative information, because you can put the narrative, your story in as part of this data collection. So the survey was available in hard copy online an app on a smartphone. And we learned a huge amount of going through this as well, because one size doesn't fit everybody. There's no point in you developing an app if the people you're trying to engage with don't have a smartphone, or if they don't have access to a computer. So actually you need to be thinking about who are your audience, who is it that you want to engage with, and what is the best way of doing that. And it may be that there's lots of different things that you need to be thinking about when you're trying to do this. So in terms of listening, we did a lot of engagement. Could we have done more? Probably. I think that this is a journey we're on, and the ways to do it well and ways to do it not so well will be a continuing learning process, if you like. So we had 584 respondents. I think that was pretty good. This was a new way of doing things, so I think that we should be quite happy with that. Would we have loved more? Yes, we would. But you know what? I think that's not bad for a first stab at this sort of thing. We got lots of really useful information. A few of the standouts for me were predominantly female respondents. So that raises a question with me about how do we get more males engaged with this sort of thing? How do we make sure that we're getting the voice of as many people as we possibly can? So I find that very interesting. So just a couple of results. From a person-centred care point of view, you can see that there wasn't a huge amount in the middle. So if you like, the middle is the sweet spot. So it's clear that from a person-centred care point of view, we have a lot more work to do. So what does it mean? Many respondents aren't experiencing person-centred care. Many staff aren't successfully conveying empathy, dignity and respect to patients. Conversations concentrate on the medical condition, and Helen made reference to this really well earlier. Sometimes that's not the important thing for the individual or families. The medical condition, it's more about the individual's experience of care, and there may be other things that that individual is really worried about, and we spend most of our time focusing in on the medical condition. So clearly we have a lot of work to do there. And decisions about treatment are based most on health staff knowledge and health service resources, with limited input from what the patient wants. So I think campaigns like What Matters to You is really important. Although my grandmother would be turning in her grave going, you mean you haven't asked the patient in the first place? And she has a point there. But actually, if we're not doing it, then campaigns like that I think are very important. So coordinated care, what did we learn? Not a huge surprise, but many people aren't experiencing coordinated care. 2 out of 3 people have experienced disruption when trying to have their health and social care needs met. And I think everybody in this room will know you get your appointment, you're expected to be very grateful for your appointment, even though that appointment means that it disrupts somebody's entire life. You get somebody to look after your kids, you make all the arrangements, and then you get a letter in the post to tell you that your clinic's postponed, your appointment's postponed, and then you're expected to do it all again. And we just don't think about those things as much as we should in healthcare. 2 out of 3 people don't experience team decision making. A quarter of people don't know who made decisions about their treatment, and a quarter don't know what's happening after the experience was over. And yet, if I ask my colleagues, they'll say, but they got the leaflet. You know, so got the leaflet, checks the box, that information was given. And that clearly isn't enough, and we clearly need to be thinking about what do we need to do in addition to that. For more than half of people, follow-up is happening, but not knowing what is happening is disempowering for people. And I'm currently experiencing that at the moment, where my family are in a kind of a limbo position between diagnosis and what happens next. And I have to say that's a very frightening place to be, where you just simply don't know what's happening next. And I like to know, even if you can't predict it accurately, I would still like to have some idea about what's going to happen next. And very often we don't do that in healthcare, and of course we can. Communication, well, listen, suffice it to say that we can do a lot better from a communication point of view. So in the analysis, those of you, you'll be very familiar with this. There was a coming together of healthcare providers, clinical strategy and programmes, and patients and advocacy organisations. And when I sat in on that workshop, I found it immensely powerful. I thought that actually coming together to share those different perspectives was just an incredible revelation for me, and I think it was for a lot of people that were in the room that day. And I think we really started to get an appreciation of the different perspectives and the different parts of expertise that we all bring to this conversation, because you have lived experience and then you have got the experience gained by years of either working in frontline services or in terms of designing services. So I think that we have started a really interesting conversation here, and also figure out a way that might work to make sure that that voice is being heard. So there's lots of fabulous stuff about areas for improvement and also acts of kindness. But the big things here are about communication and the information. Now, those are things that we can definitely do something about to make sure that communication and information, the types of information that people want and the types of information that we're sharing is better. So we want to get to the middle, okay? So what needs to change? Coordination, care planning, communication and partnership. So the idea of partnership, I think, is a really, really important one. So in terms of the co-design, co-production, we had the national piece and the local piece. And we're still trying to figure out what is the best way to incorporate that information to make sure that it is actually resulting in change at the front line. So that is what we've done. Is we've worked with the older person services through the integrated care programme for older people to really work with the CHO and the relevant acute hospital services to make sure that that information gets fed into the design and delivery of services. And there's no doubt that what matters is what gets measured. But as Helen was saying earlier, is what gets measured what matters? And I think that we need to get far better at measuring what matters. So there's no doubt that we're not there yet, but I think that we've really started to have really good quality conversations about how we might do this properly. And the importance of organisations like IPPOSI is just really, it's immeasurable. And we would never, ever have learnt so much if it hadn't been for IPPOSI, and I'm very grateful to you all for that. Because there's so much I said earlier about them and us, whereas at the end of the day, there really is just us. We just bring different experiences to the table, and those different perspectives are relevant. Even if we don't agree with each other, they're relevant, and they're all part of that jigsaw of the experience of life, I guess. And I think it's really important that we're able to share those experiences so that we make better decisions. And they say, as I always say, we're at the start of a journey, and I know that we haven't got there yet, but sometimes the best part is being on the journey, and I think being on the journey together is a very exciting one, and I'm very grateful to each and every one of you for going on the journey with me. Thank you very much.